All right, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome once again. As I had introduced myself earlier today, I am Linda Mupupa, the Public Relations Officer for the Swakopmund municipality. So once again, do allow me to welcome you to the beautiful Swakopmund. Please give yourselves a huge round of applause simply for being in this wonderful place. Thank you so much. Now, can we please give Ms. Victoria Haihambo another huge round of applause? That was indeed a very informative presentation she had over there. I know some of us in communications have already studied public relations, have already studied, social media content and how to go about it. However, there must have been something that you didn't know already that you must have learned today, isn't it? All right, thank you so much, Madam Hayambo. Next on our program, who will be discussing youth and SMME digital and social media marketing. This is also another masterclass, will be Nkululeko Nkosi. Nkululeko is the co-founder and COO of Saturated Africa, all the way from South Africa. Can we please give him a huge round of applause? Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nkululeko Nkosi, and I am from a startup called Saturated Africa. We are based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I think my presentation is basically just going to be a very good follow-up to the previous presentation which Victoria had. So social media shouldn't be something that we basically just look over as you being able to download a mere app and posting. You know, there's a method to the madness, there's a process, there's processes and structures and actual formulas that you can essentially follow to generate the success that you basically need and can actually achieve on these platforms. So the introduction here is you basically, as an SMME or an entrepreneur or a freelancer, understanding the power of your digital brand. Now, there's branding from a perspective of you looking at it from an offline perspective, but then there's also branding from a digital perspective. This means that you need to constantly also think about how you are going to be positioning your brand online. So there's a very important concept that you essentially need to understand when it comes to digital and social media marketing. You need to understand that there's owned and earned channels. Now, the owned channels that you basically are going to mainly be working with are going to be your website. So if you essentially own a website or an online store or a mobile application, you know that that's at least an asset or digital real estate that you own yourself. However, you then also have distribution channels. So these are your Facebooks, your LinkedIns, your TikToks, your YouTube, and these are obviously channels that you are going to be channeling content, and this content is basically going to allow you to earn some form of respect and traction and success on these platforms. This then brings us to three very important aspects when it comes to digital and social media marketing. Number one, discoverability is something that you obviously are going to be working towards achieving. The second one is access. Obviously, you are looking to access some type of success or some type of performance that you are essentially looking to achieve when it gets to the use of your social media. Then number three, which is obviously what most businesses are going to be looking for, which is customer engagements or some form of conversion that you basically are basically going to be working at achieving. So if you are a tour guide or a tour operator, you obviously want to get some form of leads or some type of sign up to a product or package that you basically will have. So now we need to basically move to the basics. We need to understand the basics that we basically are going to be working with. What are these basics? Now, I'll bring you back to the discoverability, access, and customer engagements conversation that I just mentioned. So under discoverability, you need to obviously break that down into three sections. So you need to understand that there's channels of discovery. So depending on what you are using your social media for, you basically are going to be looking at, okay, based on my brand, do I actually, will people discover me on social media? Will people discover me on the Google search? Will people discover me on marketplaces that obviously exist on the internet? So that's basically some of the considerations that you basically need to look into. The second part under discoverability is obviously the platforms. So when we're speaking platforms, I mentioned a couple earlier. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's Instagram, there's LinkedIn, YouTube. There's so many social media channels that actually exist that we can make use of and access quite affordably, and most of the time, most of them are free. We don't really need to pay a subscription to Facebook, LinkedIn, unless you power use on LinkedIn as an individual. But to create a company page is essentially free for everybody, and you as an SMME or an entrepreneur, you can do that. And then there's obviously the part of affiliates. So in the social media space specifically, I think that works quite well because your affiliates could be your influencers. You can also have strategic partnerships where Meta has basically allowed us to basically foster some type of, you can basically declare that, okay, this brand is associated or affiliated with my brand, and you can basically co-brand in your communications, in your marketing. So those are some of the things that exist in terms of that. When we move to access, the thinking here is how will people be able to access my communication or whatever I'm offering on social media? Right? So this is obviously your channels of access will be your website, your e-commerce platform if you are selling products or anything that you are obviously selling by way of your online channel, social media, and metaverse if you obviously are looking into going into Web3. That's another channel of access you can basically consider. When we go to platforms of access, they're quite similar to what I mentioned when to discoverability. It's basically all your social media platforms. So basically, how are people accessing your content, accessing some of your communication, your content, etc. Affiliates, publishers. So these are other blogs within the network. There's the search and display. So obviously with the display network, there's so much, there's over 2 million affiliated publishers through their ads platform. So whenever you're running ads, you can essentially target those publishers that are obviously specific to whatever market or segment that you are looking to speak to. And then blogs, I think I did mention that. We get to customer engagement. This is how you are basically engaging people. So obviously a lot of the social media channels already allow you to have some type of engagement. You can speak to them, you can comment back, you can like their comments, you can even set up somewhat of a customer support system on some of the channels, Facebook, Messenger. You can integrate WhatsApp, so you can actually be a bit more conversational when it gets to the way you basically are engaging with your prospects on social media. So the platforms are quite similar to the other three pillars. When it gets to the affiliates, it's the actual platforms themselves. Some CRM channels, so if you are using certain CRM tools, you can basically also plug them into your efforts on digital and social media platforms, and you can then obviously get the most out of your efforts. So when we then move a step further, we then obviously now are trying to then link this discoverability, access, and customer engagements sort of thinking to something that's a bit more tangible from a marketing perspective. So when you look at discoverability, we are basically linking that to awareness. When you're looking to access, we are linking that to consideration. And then when we get to customer engagements, we obviously want that to lead to some form of conversion, whatever that is, depending on what you are essentially offering to your prospects. That brings us to the more strategic thinking that needs to go into your communication. I did mention when I was starting my talk that you don't really approach these platforms, be it digital or social, as some random that you can do. As much as there's opportunities for virality when you are spontaneously creating videos, we see a lot on platforms like TikTok, the Reels platforms and Shorts. However, there needs to be, as I mentioned earlier, some method to the madness. So your thinking here is you need to look at it as a funnel. So at the top of the funnel, you are looking at your social and sort of your display media. This is basically all the stuff that basically will be enticing and encouraging the reader engagement. So there you can basically break it down and say, social media, I'm going to use social media. I'm going to, if I'm looking to basically tap into paid search, I'm going to look at Google Display. So Google Display, if you see an ad on YouTube, if you see a banner on your favorite website, that's essentially what Google Display entails. And then obviously there's also the content marketing element of it. So if you have a website, you obviously want to create some type of content, right? That's the content that's essentially going to be bringing people there. So for example, if you are more on the services side of or consultancy, for example, there's not much that you can really do from a content perspective in terms of how people are consuming content from an entertainment perspective. So you obviously would tailor your messaging to obviously speak to your relevant audiences through thought leadership content, through blogging and content marketing. So these are newsletters, these are blogs, these are certain papers that you obviously will be putting on your platforms for people to download, for people to subscribe to. When you're in the middle of the funnel, you can obviously now start looking at things like search engine optimization, pay-per-click advertising from a search perspective, and obviously you're looking to generate tangible leads for your business. This basically entails things that you need to, like when you have a website or you basically have a mailing, a mailer that you are sending out, how does that essentially look when a user is basically reading that? You know, so your landing page needs to follow all the best practices for you to capture the audience in a manner that will allow them to get them to the point where they are converting to a sale, to a sign up, to a download. And obviously that obviously goes to you looking at areas where you are obviously optimizing various aspects of your communication from a social perspective. And I'll go deeper into this part because there's quite a lot that a lot of small businesses often miss when it comes to their use of some of these platforms and some of the structure. When you get to the bottom of the funnel, you basically are now looking at brand advocacy and relationship building. So it's not just enough for you to routinely send out a blog or a mailer. How are you essentially building those relationships with your prospects and your customers? So this basically needs you to consider the top and the middle funnel as necessary sections of your efforts to lead you to this relationship building and brand advocacy space. So how then do we then build the strategic foundation? So how we basically look at social media and digital, we obviously separate it, but we know that they work together. So we usually break it down, as you can see on the screen, in this perspective. When we look at social media, with every campaign, every message, or every sort of piece of communication that needs to go out, we need to obviously start with the strategic rationale. So this basically sets your intent, it sets your intended and some of the insights that you need to essentially look into in crafting something that you can at the end measure successfully. Then you obviously need to look at your channel strategy. So a channel strategy basically means that you now are moving away from winging it and just posting whenever you feel like it. You basically are looking at, what am I exactly doing on Facebook? What am I saying on LinkedIn? Do I really need TikTok for my business? I heard there's this new thing that YouTube is doing called Shorts. Do I also need to jump on that? Those types of things, you know. So the channel strategy basically compels you to look at every channel that you are basically going to be making use of and set that intention of what you're trying to achieve and how you are essentially going to use that channel. Once you've done that, you then move to the creative/ad format section. So this is basically you saying, here are the forms and the types of creative that I'm going to use. So the creative is essentially your artwork. Are you going to be using, when you are running ads, carousel ads? Are you going to be using slideshow ads? Are you going to be using stories when you post? That type of stuff. So you need to basically drill it down to this level. Are you have dynamic content, audio-visual content, tap into reels? This is basically where you are going to be communicating that and putting that in sort of setting it in stone so that you are able to know and direct your efforts in terms of the social media. Then there's obviously the core message. Usually you segment your communication from a campaign perspective. So it could be Valentine's Month or Mother's Day month or Africa Month, because we're currently in Africa Month. You know that a specific message that you would want to particularly drive that will be associated with your brand or what you intend to do and achieve on that particular month. That message needs to also be very clear in this sort of framework so that you know exactly how your communication is going to be set out and what you're essentially going to be saying. Then we get to the hashtags. I know there's, on platforms like Instagram, there's this thing that a lot of us often do where we are a small business, we are in tourism, and maybe we are a tour operator, and then we have at the bottom of our copy or our caption, we have probably like 50 different hashtags that we put there in hopes that we're probably going to land to the correct feeds. Now, often that basically, it often appears a bit messy. So what you basically need to do is also set that intention of which hashtags you are basically going to be using, you know. And there are tools out there where you can basically look at which hashtags are going to be generating sort of those impressions that you so desperately are looking for as a small business. But it needs you to really focus on making sure that there's consistency here. On one post, you can't be saying small businesses and then on another post saying something else that's completely out of what you are essentially doing. So you usually can just limit it to about 10 to 15 hashtags, but you don't need to use all of them at the same time. Them, you can incorporate them into the copy so that it can basically flow quite nicely. And then you also need to decide on hashtags that you essentially are going to own. It could be your brand name, it could be your brand name and a word associated to what you do. This is obviously maybe your industry that you are in, but it needs you to essentially follow it in that way. And obviously there are going to be opportunities where there's trending hashtags. You also need to now, obviously following this framework, go back to your strategy and see how you can then intelligently incorporate some of the trending hashtags into your existing communication so that it's not really outside of what you're essentially trying to communicate to people. Same thing applies with the digital side. The only difference would be the channel strategy. So obviously you are, if the digital side, you're probably working with PPC, which is pay-per-click advertising. So you mostly are going to be sending your messaging out on the search network as well as the display network. There's also other various ad platforms to make use of, but I think from an SMME perspective, using Google Ads, Bing Ads, that basically is quite accessible and fairly easy to set up and use. And then obviously we then need to get to you then defining audience. This is very important because you then need to know who you are looking to speak to. There's so many people that are currently on these social media platforms, and not all of them are going to be interested in what you are saying and what you are offering. So it's very important for you to also then understand your audience, that you know how you can tailor your messaging so that it can actually speak to some of their immediate needs and of the things that they essentially need addressed from a pain point perspective. So you need to actually set out and define what that audience is. You need to define it from a persona perspective, and then based on that, you then obviously need to take it a step further and say, if John is sort of a decision maker in a particular company and I am a SMME that's looking to do B2B offerings, then I know that I'm most likely not going to find them on TikTok, and I'm most likely going to find them on LinkedIn. So you need to then obviously then define that in that way so that you can then obviously know that you are channeling the right content to the right channels so you can reach the right people. And then your personas, I mentioned those as well. So from a travel perspective, you can segment it in this manner. Obviously, you can have more than 3 or even less, but you obviously need to do that necessary work to define your personas so you can tailor the message to those people. Then when we get to the acquisition strategy part, this is basically you now looking at some of the, I guess, the technical communication elements that you need to start measuring. So from a social media acquisition perspective, you obviously are tracking followers. As much as followers are, depending on how you view it, they can be a vanity metric if they are not directly impacting your business from a business perspective, if they're not leading to sales or you converting those followers into actual customers. And obviously there's engagement, comments, shares, link clicks. These are obviously real engagements that people are making on your content and whatever you are actually putting out there for them to consume and ultimately make some type of decision. The web search engine acquisition part, this is obviously you looking at platforms such as Google Search Console. If you have a website, linking that to platforms like Google Search Console so that it can give you rich data based on how people are searching within your industry or sector. If you've done that, it basically will give you a lot of really good and rich analytics that you can then use to inform even the content writing that you would need to embark on. It will tell you that when it comes to your brand, people are still searching these specific keywords, and those keywords that you've trained, that it tells you, you can then obviously then use those to build a keyword list when you are doing your pay-per-click advertising. Affiliate partners marketing, here it's you basically looking at how you can basically engage your affiliates and use your affiliates to basically be your ambassadors and how you would basically track that for success. Then we move to getting the basics right. And I think I did mention that this is something that we often really do mix in. So you'd often find that when it gets to social media, we are posting sort of like a vertical image on the Facebook timeline, and then it cuts the messaging, and you can't really read the post properly. So there's actually dimensions that you can follow. So Facebook, the timeline is typically 1200 by 900, so you need to obviously make sure that when you are designing your creative, you consider these so that they can actually fit well, because most of the time the creative breaks. And then when you're scrolling on mobile, you're not seeing all the information there. Stories, the stories format is quite consistent across platforms, as well as the reel, so it's about 1080 by 1920, so you make sure that you actually tailor and you resize your creative in this manner so that you can actually get the most out of these platforms and your creative doesn't break as you are actually doing all this hard work to make sure that you are doing things right. TikTok, there's essentially one format, can post others, but they really don't work well. They'll obviously penalize you also because of how that's structured, because there's a way that the content essentially needs to be structured. So as you can see, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, they somewhat are similar, but these are some of the nuances that you need to basically consider when you are posting. So just to also just take it a step further when it gets to the social media part. So you may have a website, you may have a blog, you may have an online store, and maybe the link to the product that you are looking to sell is a very long link because of the product name. So now if you post that link on your Facebook page with those 50 hashtags that I mentioned, it often looks very untidy. So what you then do is use link shorteners. There's many types of link shorteners that exist. There's Bitly, there's Owly, there's so many types of link shorteners. And these link shorteners basically shorten your link. You can even customize them with some of these platforms that offer this functionality. You can customize it to your brand. You can put your company's name there. You can put something that's specific to a campaign so that you can actually distinguish it from all the other links that exist. Using link shorteners will really help you just have your content be a bit more neater and really punch straight to the point. And then the second point, I think, now we have so many different types of AI tools, and you typically are not going to have an extensive team as a small business, to have a copywriter, to have an art director, to have a social media manager, to have a social media strategist, to have a digital strategist, and these are real roles that bigger companies have within their digital and social teams to manage all of this. So you can obviously automate and make that a lot easier for yourself from a content and a content creating perspective. You can basically make use of some of the AI tools to help you create some of the copy and the content, the text content that you would be putting on your captions on social media. And obviously there's many design tools that are fairly easy to use, such as Canva. There's many online where you can basically design and basically build your digital team that can allow you to obviously automate everything that you are doing. And then the most important thing is really understanding that because you are going to be in a situation where you don't really have a lot of capacity to fill all these roles, you most likely going to find yourself doing a lot of this work. So when you are doing a lot of this work, a lot of these platforms have made it easy, and natively so, because previously you would need to sign up for a social media management tool and pay a subscription so that you can schedule and plan your content. Nowadays, through the Meta Business Suite, LinkedIn also recently incorporated this feature. You schedule your content ahead of time. So towards the end of the month, you know it's going to be June, you know that there's maybe particular holidays, and you maybe also know that there's going to be a lot of things that you are looking to communicate in a particular month. You need to then obviously craft your content preferably a week before the previous month ends, so that you can then start scheduling the content towards the end of the month. So obviously you can post content, and all you would then need to do is just track the analytics as the month goes along. And then it gets to the section, I think, of my presentation, where you need to now maybe start considering using paid media, which is obviously you advertising on these digital and social media platforms. And some of the thinking that you need to consider when you are doing this and developing your spend. Now, when it gets to this part, it's fairly flexible. You know, it would be a bit challenging for me to say, for you to start to get these results, you need to spend 5,000 Namibian dollars, for example. It really is dependent on what you are looking to achieve. And obviously, because now you have the framework that can allow you to incorporate a lot of the best practices, you can get more out of the budget. Even 500 Namibian dollars can get you so much more than if you had spent 5,000 Namibian dollars doing the wrong thing. So that's why the strategic thinking when you are putting together your communication will really help you make the most of your budget. Because when it gets to setting the budget, you can go on Meta, you can go on LinkedIn, you can go on Google Ads. They basically generate potential numbers. So it can say you are looking to spend X amount on these ads, you are looking to target people in these regions. You are most likely, with this budget and with your current targeting profile, are going to reach X amount of people. So it doesn't really help to really fix yourself on looking at the budget, but it's really important for you to really look at these building blocks that are quite important so you can make the most out of the budget for your results. So the main things that I would say under this section is really focusing on defining your targets. So your targeting profile, who you are looking to speak to and reach, is very important, because that basically will influence who you ultimately get your paid media or your campaigns in front of. And then obviously from another perspective that's outside of the paid media space is understanding some of the content production requirements. So if you are going to obviously you're going to need maybe to shoot certain videos, you maybe need a specific camera, you maybe now need to look at hiring specific skilled people that can assist you with certain production requirements. That's another space that you essentially need to look into and put those line items aside and say, I may have to spend this amount. But if you're going to be doing it yourself, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't spend anything. It just obviously means that you will need to put a certain amount of effort in generating some of the creative that you desire and you want to actually put out there. And then the most, I think the most important for me is obviously the process of you mapping out your content activation tactics and channels. And I think I did speak about that process of how you are basically moving from point A to B, identifying what's important in terms of the channels that you need to use to communicate where your people essentially and your customers are. And this is very important. And to extend that further, I did also touch on the strategic partnerships from an online perspective. There's influencers, there's also other brands that are within your space that you can collaborate with. Maybe they have a specific audience that you need to tap into, and you also own a particular audience that they need to tap into. You can then obviously foster those relationships and see how you can do collaborative marketing initiatives online for you to obviously activate this content at a fairly reasonable cost, because you won't necessarily need to spend in terms of developing certain things, because you are actually leveraging the efforts of other SMMEs and entrepreneurs. So this is also, I think, one of the most important ones we can consider moving forward. And thank you very much. I think that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. My question is on how do you manage adverse reviews on Facebook page? Because from where I come from, there was a challenge of one entrepreneur who was in the events business. So she had a Facebook page. Then one of the days, it was so hot, and she was hosting, I think, a wedding of some sort. And the cake melted because it was so hot.
Yeah.
And the client was not happy. They posted a lot of negative comments and pictures on her Facebook page, and she had to close her business. So my question is, how do we manage those negative comments that will come up on your Facebook page?
Okay, so when it comes to, I think, issues like that, I think the recommendation there is to have a sort of what we call a social media escalation process. So you are not always going to have happy customers, and people obviously find it a lot easier to reach out to a particular brand or business on social media. So that basically is you determining certain frequently asked questions or frequent complaints that you receive, and you then develop responses, right, to those. So if someone is complaining about maybe bad service, you already know how to escalate that. You know that, okay, based on the comment that they said they had a bad experience, you need to obviously have an escalation process. You know that you will respond and say, hi, thank you for actually letting us know that this was your experience. How can we assist you? Please share your details, and then you can then take it offline. In terms of removing them, I know a lot of the social media platforms now allow you to hide certain comments, so you can make use of that, but it often can look a bit shady in terms of you trying to manage it like that. I think the best way, if people are commenting, for example, on a post, you can basically respond. If you don't respond and you run away, it's going to make the whole situation worse. So the best thing is to look at how you can develop an escalation process, develop frequently asked questions that your customers are basically asking, and actually note down some of the complaints. You may find a pattern, and then obviously look at how you can then move the person from them being in social media to you engaging them outside that space, but make sure that you engage them so that other prospective customers can see that you are responsive. Because what frustrates a lot of people is that. And then they also have reviews on these platforms. Google has reviews as well. Same thing. You can respond. So now you can actually respond to that review. And if maybe a customer was not saying something that actually happened, you have a platform for correction.
Good morning. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My question about paid adverts on social media. Yeah. My experience with paid ads on Facebook has been that when you push an ad, you do get the numbers that the algorithm will give you, that maybe this budget with the targeting that you've put, you're looking to reach 10,000 people in 3 days. Yeah. You get to those numbers, but my question really is, are they the quality of the audience that you're targeting? Because you end up getting a lot of spam messaging in your inbox or comments that are unrelated to the post you're pushing. And it does start to look like you're getting the numbers regardless. How do you avoid that? How do you get even low numbers, but your audience and also people responding to the relevant post in question? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think that's a really question. I think this basically brings me back to, I think, the elements that I had touched on. One being the definition of your targeting. So that really does happen, where you actually are getting the numbers, but you obviously are not getting any type of return. Now, the way that campaigns are often set up, there's various types of objectives that are there. So when you are clear in the objective that you have selected and the one that you want to make use of, it makes it a lot more easier. But that's not the only thing that you need to do. You need to look at what I had mentioned also earlier, when I spoke about looking at how you are structuring your actual communication. Is it clear? Are people understanding exactly what it is? And is it straight to the point? So this is basically your creative as well as your copy or your captions. So in terms of targeting, you really need to use that framework where you are essentially defining every single persona. And it's not that you're going to exactly reach all of them. However, when you do reach the ones that are actually there, you can also create something that in the meta space is called lookalike audiences. So you can basically use an audience profile that you've seen that is actually outperforming another one. So it's always good to create different segments of audience profiles so that you can also run A/B tests and see which one is a bit more successful. And then the one that is successful, you can then obviously prompt ads manager to basically create a lookalike audience that can basically then obviously go find other similar people that are there that may share the same interest as the people that you've achieved success in reaching successfully. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Very pertinent information from Mr. Nkosi. If we could please give him a huge round of applause.